Truce between Israel and Hamas is set to end today. More hostages were released last night, including almost all of the elderly Israelis, but none of them were Americans. To get a sense of what the conversation is like on Capitol Hill, from the strategy to saving the rest of the hostages to spending on this war and the war in Ukraine, I'm joined now by Senator J.D. Vance from Ohio. Now, we learned on Monday, Senator, a 4-year-old became the first American to be released by Hamas. What do you and other members of the Senate know about the status of the other American hostages? And is this process happening fast enough, in your opinion?
Well, I certainly don't think it's fast enough. It's great that we got one American hostage released, especially given that it is, like you said, it's such a young child, and we're all thrilled for her family. I do worry when you see these hostage releases coming. There are so few Americans that are in the batches of hostages actually getting out of the control of this terrorist organization. And I hate to say it, Lindsay, but I think it speaks to the weakness and the perceived weakness of America on the world stage. I can't imagine almost at any time in my lifetime, if you have a terrorist organization with American hostages, they should be at the front of the line to get released because we're such a feared country. But unfortunately, that's just not the case right now. So we're going to keep on working, praying, hoping for their safe release, all the hostages, but especially the Americans. And I think the president could be doing a lot more to try to force the issue. We'll see if that happens over the next couple of weeks.
Now, spending on wars and a federal budget deadline that is approaching in the new year, Democrats want conditions on the funding for the Israeli war on Hamas and for them to follow what they're calling U.S. values while fighting with our financial support. So what is your reaction to that?
Well, I think, first of all, the Israelis are fighting with U.S. values. If you look at the civilian casualties, they're terrible and, of course, regretted every single time that it happens. But Israel is fighting an existential war. They are taking proper precautions. And a big part of the reason why civilians are being killed is because Hamas is using these civilians as human shields. So I think Israel has earned the right to defend itself without America, effectively trying to micromanage their particular conflict and trying to ensure that the Israelis set themselves up to a standard that's impossible to meet and ultimately just leads to more death and destruction. On the supplemental package, broadly speaking, Lindsay, as I've said to you before, I think it's really important that we have the separate debates on each of these packages. I think the American people really hate it when we have these massive spending bills. You take 6 or 7 or 8 different priorities, collapse them into one. Nobody knows what we're debating. A lot of people haven't read the legislation, and that's a really, really significant failure of leadership, especially on such important issues of national security. Let's debate the Ukraine conflict. I don't think we should be spending more resources on Ukraine, but let's at least have the debate. Let's debate what we're doing in Israel. Let's debate what we're doing with China and Taiwan. And of course, most importantly, let's debate how to secure the American southern border. The fact that we're trying to force all this stuff together is a real failure of leadership in Washington, which is why I've been taking the approach that I've been taking.
What would work? What would you vote for?
Well, first of all, I've already and in fact would continue to support aid to the Israelis. I think that they're fighting for their lives, and they're also fighting a common enemy. We have to remember that Hamas is connected to almost every Islamic terrorist organization that's committed attacks on Americans, both here at home and abroad. Then the Ukraine question, look, my view on Ukraine is we should not be supporting any more money to the Ukrainians, especially when the President of the United States has failed to articulate a strategy.
We are also into the holiday spending season with families feeling so stretched right now. You really cannot even get much at the grocery store. Your dollar does not stretch like it used to. We have new government data that shows Ohioans need to spend another almost $10,000 more a year just to keep their same standard of living that they had back in 2021. What is the current administration and Congress getting wrong about tackling inflation?
Well, first of all, this is really heartbreaking. Another $10,000 a year just to keep up with the standard of living you had 2 years ago. That means a lot of Christmas gifts that are not going to be given this year. That means a lot of families that are going to have to really stretch those dollars, not eat the kind of Christmas meal that they would like. And look, we have to be honest with ourselves. It is because of a failure of economic policies in Washington. A lot of us have been warning for 2 years that if you take on these $1.5, $2 trillion deficits, that gets absorbed by the American American people in the form of inflation. To get the inflation under control, we've got to make more of our own stuff in the United States of America, become more self-reliant economically, and get the federal spending under control. Of course, all these issues are related, but unless we tackle this problem, Lindsay, those inflation numbers are not going to get better, and the American people are struggling. I think it's a real failure from Washington, a real failure of economic policy, and it's why I've been trying to encourage the president and all of us here in Washington to go in a different direction.
All right, Senator Vance, thank you so much for joining us here on 21 News at 5.